1, check 2. Everybody here okay in the back? Looking good, smelling nice. My name is Petri Parvinen. I'm a professor of sales management here at Aalto University, professor of strategic marketing and management at Helsinki University. We host these TLT talks to inspire the community to open up new avenues of high growth entrepreneurship, of venture capital practice, and of industrial transformation around high growth and the development of the economy. We do inspirational talks, we do industry leadership talks, and we do startup talks. And I don't know which one this is, because today we have the honor of having a multi-talented guy over here. Risto Siilasmaa is the chairman of Nokia Corporation. He's a board professional in several corporations. He's the founder of F-Secure, so he's an entrepreneur to the max. He's an angel investor, and he's been involved in the public debate around creating a new Finland very actively lately. So what we're going to be doing today here with Risto is that we're going to be talking about two things. We thought about one theme and we couldn't nail it, so we're going to be talking about two things. First, the first half will be dedicated to using entrepreneurship as a leadership philosophy, applying the key ideas of entrepreneurship outside the traditional realm of entrepreneurship. And then Risto is going to be talking about creating trust in practice, because the kinds of transformations and the kind of growth that we're looking forward to will not come with complete contracting. It will never be perfect from a contractual point of view. Trust in these kinds of transitory phases will always play a very important part. And we, as Finland in the global scene, we need to be able to leverage that ability of Finnish corporations and Finnish people in delivering trust. So it's going to be two phases with Risto kicking off each one of the things, then me asking a couple of questions. While I do ask the questions, please think of one, and at any phase, put up your hand and I'll ask you guys to then shout out loud for a little bit of an interactive thing. But it's going to be a very intensive 1 hour. So going into the first theme, Risto, entrepreneurship as a leadership philosophy, and everybody, massive applause.
Thanks, everybody. The second half I would rephrase slightly. It's about leadership in practice, and I think the best metric for leadership is the trust that is generated with the employees, with your colleagues, with your customers, with your shareholders. That's the result of good leadership. So I'll talk about that in the second half if we get there. If we end up doing something else through this hour, that's fine as well. But let me talk a little bit about what I think when I say the word entrepreneur. I have been an entrepreneur all my life. I started working when I was 12. I went into selling meat in a butcher shop when I was about 15. I started consulting Finnish larger companies on PCs and PC networks when I was 16, 17. I sold PCs in a department store. And then when I was 22, as a second year student at this university, I started F-Secure. Didn't graduate until 15 years later. So sort of made all the right moves to become a real entrepreneur. And of all the statements that I have heard, there's one that captures the essence of entrepreneurship very well, and that was by George Bernard Shaw. He said that some people see the world as it is and ask why, while others see things that never were and ask why not. The first part, the people who see the world as it is and ask why, is a very fitting description for this particular place, because these people are scientists. They observe things happening around them and they ask, why do things happen that way? And then they start collecting evidence and forming theories, and they start to understand how the world works. The second half of people who see things that never were and they ask why not, that's an entrepreneur. You have a vision of something that doesn't exist and you just ask yourself why not. An entrepreneur is somebody who can be described in multiple different ways. I have 9 points that I want to make about somebody who is an entrepreneur and as a leader. The first is that an entrepreneur is always accountable. He knows that, he feels that in every cell of his or her body. When you come into your office and you see that the door doesn't open smoothly, you feel accountable for the door not working properly. And you know that if I don't do anything about this, I cannot ask anybody else to do anything about it either. If I don't feel that it's my responsibility to make sure that now that I noticed that it doesn't work well, I'll go and talk to somebody so that it's fixed by tomorrow. If I don't show that example myself, if I don't think that way, I cannot ask my colleagues to feel that way either. You can easily think about the world and your workplace, your customers, your products this way, regardless of whether you are the entrepreneur, the CEO, the chairman, the receptionist, the cleaning lady, the cleaning man, whoever. You can always take that same feeling of accountability and live by it. Have you ever rented a car? Hands up. Have you ever washed your rental car? There's one person who has washed his rental car. That's for your wedding, okay. That doesn't count then. But the point is that if you don't feel ownership and accountability, you don't wash the car. You don't fix the door. You don't fix the customer experience. You don't treat your customers the right way if you don't feel ownership. Nobody except one person washes a rental car. Second, an entrepreneur always faces the facts. I should say that an entrepreneur always should face the facts because not nearly all entrepreneurs do. But there's this thing that if you are the entrepreneur, eventually you will have to face the facts. And over time you learn perhaps to face them sooner. And when you face the facts, you naturally start to create a culture where bad news travel fast. One of my favorite sayings is that no news is bad news is good news, and good news is no news. And what it means is it's very pragmatic. I mean, bad news are great news. Then you know what is wrong, what doesn't work, what should be fixed. No news is really bad news, because then you don't know what's happening. Good news don't matter that much because you expected good things to happen and you don't necessarily react to those. So bad news are really good news. And many companies that have gone through significant negative disruptions did not react to bad news. Or they didn't listen. They didn't want them. People learn quickly not to deliver bad news. If the message bearer is shot at dawn, the next message bearer will not come to you. So how do you, when you're really disappointed, you hear something bad that you didn't really want happening, how do you reward the person in a positive way who brought that news to you? Because you are really struggling to contain the loud yell inside you, but still you should make that person feel good about bringing the news to you quickly. Third, an entrepreneur can never give up. I think that's really the core of entrepreneurship. no matter what you face, you always need to have people close to you know that you will not give up. Because that's the part that gives them strength. That's what gives them faith. That's what saves a company from the brink of destruction. That's what saves a team at the brink of destruction. And that's, of course, leadership at its best. You lead from the front, you show the example, you believe. I like to say that a good entrepreneur is a paranoid optimist. And both parts are equally important. Paranoia means that always looking for the next challenge, always open to the difficulties, always looking for a solution. And you always believe that the solution will be found. You always believe that tomorrow will be better. I have sometimes said that once you have worked for a long enough time as a leader, you have faced very difficult situations multiple times. At least for me, the scariness of those situations started to decrease significantly over time. Because I, perhaps stupidly, started believing that as I have always before managed to survive, I will do it this time as well. It has happened so many times before. I mean, the technology bubble bursting in 2001, a huge disaster for many, many technology companies. And then there was a couple of years that were a bit more difficult, and then the growth started again. And all through that, I knew that we'll survive. Just because I had sort of went down into that dark valley before so many times and always known that if I just keep on walking, the valley will not continue forever. There will be a new mountain. I will walk up that incline, and from the top a beautiful view will be seen and the sun is shining again. And then of course there's the next valley. And I know that it will come. You can recognize an entrepreneur from the way they think about risks. When you see a risk, take it, is what defines at least some entrepreneurs. And risk management is not avoiding risks. It's deciding which risks you want to take. Of the openness towards risk-taking and the encouragement for risk-taking and the encouragement for failure. Quick failure, bringing the bad news quickly, deciding this doesn't work, let's try something else, is essential for success. And an entrepreneur is a learning addict. You really need to love the feeling that, hey, I learned something today. And you need to think about, what did I learn? It's not just that you sort of go through life being exposed to a lot of learnings but not taking them with you. And you need to cherish what you have learned, even the most difficult learnings. Stopping to learn means stopping to live. The entrepreneur is able to prioritize. Who has heard about Xiaomi? The Chinese smartphone company, Xiaomi. It's hailed as the fastest value appreciating young company ever. Lei Jun, who founded Xiaomi, said that he founded it because his previous company, which was doing sort of quite well, but he felt that it was not working right. And he understood that it's so difficult to change an existing culture and an existing company that he wanted to try something new and in a completely different way. And he said that there were two important things when he started Xiaomi. One is focus on products, and the second one is focus on fans. He didn't have customers, he had fans. And everything else is secondary. So when he tells the story, he says that I don't have a management team in the company. We don't have any management team meetings. Because they are not about products or our fans. In reality, he has management team meetings. But the story is still good when he tells it this way. They meet every week. But it's not a formal meeting, even though the company is worth 45 billion at the moment. But more truthfully, when he had 2,500 employees in the company, 1,200 of those worked in customer support. And about 1,000 worked in R&D. 300 did everything else. He had 3 salespeople in the company, 1 for each Chinese operator. And I think he had a few others, but he didn't mention those. But anyway, it was a good story. 3 salespeople. But ignoring those details, the big picture is that he truly invested resources where he believed the company should focus. Supporting customers, making them fans, and creating the best possible products. And I think that was quite inspirational. Because we really need to think, how do we create a new kind of a company? And that was my dream when I started F-Secure. The company was called Data Fellows back then. A fellow meaning sort of a university fellow, a fellowship, and data, of course, fellow meaning a person who knows extremely much about some topic, and data was the topic, or IT, so data fellows. And I had this vision of a place where everybody would really love to work and it would be like a family. And it was a lot like that for a long time. But then, of course, when you have more than 300 people, it really becomes much more difficult. It's hard to remember everybody's name anymore, especially if you are in multiple countries. And the family feeling starts to go away. So how do you keep that feeling as you grow? The entrepreneur always looks at the horizon. What happens to most managers, and especially all CEOs, as all of you who are CEOs or have been CEOs know, that your time is taken by putting out fires. Everybody will be bringing problems to you to solve. And if you would take notes of how you spend your time, you might find out that you're spending all your time on short-term topics. And you need to force yourself to look to the horizon, think about the future, more distant future. And in my chairman roles in different companies, that's one of my critical duties, to help the CEO to lift her head up and look further ahead. Because I know that everybody else will be asking her to look at her feet, because there are some fires burning there, and she needs to put those out. So an entrepreneur should always be driven by the vision, and the vision is always about not tomorrow, but the next 5 years or 10 years. Or in some cases, like some of you know SoftBank in Japan and Sonsan, his vision that you can find from the internet is for the next 300 years. He has a 300-year strategy. It's sort of worth a smile, but when you read the deck, it actually makes some sense. Of course, it's extreme to claim that it's for 300 years. 50 years is already far ahead, but it actually makes some sense. So Google it and read it. It's worth taking a look at. And I already mentioned that the entrepreneur is a paranoid optimist. I think it sort of captures something essential about an entrepreneur. And then finally, and this is something that not all successful entrepreneurs have followed, but what I still believe is that an entrepreneur knows that he will win or lose because of the people around him, not because of what he or she does. And creating the motivating team feeling actually makes at least me feel much better about life and work. But some people like Steve Jobs obviously did things differently. And he got people working so hard, regardless. And Apple became one of the most or the most successful company in the world, at least in technology. So there are different ways to lead. And I think you need to think about how you want to lead, what kind of an entrepreneur you want to be. And as I said earlier, you can be an entrepreneurial leader regardless of whether you're the CEO or you do something else. You don't even need to be in a company. You can be an entrepreneurial leader, let's say, in this organization, as a student, in Startup Sauna, as a volunteer, in sports. Actually, one of the best statements about entrepreneurial leadership that I have heard comes from Michael Jordan, who on his 50th birthday, after the game that was organized in his honor, he gave a speech, and I quote a part of that speech. He said, "I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I have lost almost 300 games. On 26 occasions, I have been entrusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I have failed over and over and over again in my life. How I cope with it is why I succeed." So if you think about that short paragraph, he expressed a feeling of accountability. He wanted to take the game-winning shot. If the coach asked who wants to take it, I think his hand was always up. He always wanted to take it. He wanted to be accountable. He sought responsibility, even if he had missed the previous time. And he had destroyed the team's chances of winning. Everybody counted on him. He was given the final shot, just a couple seconds left on the clock, and he missed. And yet, he wanted to take the next game-winning shot again. He never gave up. When the game finished and the stadium was empty, he was there practicing his shots because he wanted to try again the next day. So he was definitely willing to take risks, but he was also facing facts. He was keeping statistics on how many game-winning shots he had missed, how many games had he lost, how many shots had he missed overall. Of course, it's sort of easy to do in basketball because other people will keep the stats for you. But he was really keen on the negative statistics as well. So I think the idea of an entrepreneurial leader can be applied to almost anything, even your private life. But maybe I'll pause here and we can discuss about leadership in general and entrepreneurship especially.
Right, yes. So we're open to questions. I'm going to ask you 2 questions to get the discussion started. I think a lot of people here, even though we have a community with a lot of inspired people who want to develop themselves, do not feel like they are now what you described an entrepreneur being. You know, just an analytical self-reflection will be saying, you know, I'm not as risk-loving as I should be. I love versatility and doing many different things, so I have a hard time prioritizing. You know, what would you have from a personal development point of view for the people here on actually how do you then develop these aspects in yourself? And just looking at people around you, also people have had difficulties with these things. If you want to grow this way, any word of advice for people who are here?
Well, I think it always starts from two things. One is self-perception, understanding yourself. You need to think about it. What makes you really happy? What do you want to achieve in your life? What do you enjoy in work? Just self-perception and self-knowledge, that's the starting point. And also acknowledging the weaknesses that you have. And then you can have a vision. It's a sort of a horizon vision. The more you work towards it, the horizon always is as far ahead. But you are making progress. I'm not like these 9 characteristics that I listed. I don't think anybody is absolutely what I listed in every single case. But it's still an ideal. There's a branch of leadership psychology research that believes that people are guided by a sort of a profile of themselves, a visionary profile of themselves that they have built and that they aspire to be. And this is sort of the profile that I have built for myself, for the entrepreneur. And every single baby step that I take towards that is always, it makes me feel good.
All right, and the second question that I have is can we just go through a couple of these things? Because from, I think, our audience point of view, some of these things are very tangible. That you pointed out how you need to hire people. If you want to prioritize that, you need to put weight on hiring certain kinds of people. But I think some of the things here, I'd like to know much more about how would you then go about it. So a couple of things. The first, the always accountable thing. What do you do if you start feeling that you don't have enough? Like you should be doing everything, your hours get longer and longer, and you try to maintain that accountability, but you just don't have enough hours in the man or girl. What do you do then? How do you avoid the sort of explosion of the stress at that point, and how would you be developing yourself?
Well, I'm handicapped in answering that question because throughout my professional life, I have always been either the CEO, the chairman, or both. So I haven't been in a situation where I would have had a bad boss, somebody who doesn't empower me in the right way or demotivates me with whatever he or she does. I have never experienced that, and it's a weakness as well because I haven't been able to learn from the great leaders or learn from the mistakes of the not so great leaders. But the way I would approach this is that I'll do my very best to change the culture in which I work. I talk about it. I talk about it to my boss. I talk about it to my colleagues. Very transparent about what I believe in. And of course there's a limit somewhere. And if the environment is not the type that I really want, I'll just walk. But as I admitted, I really have not lived through that. But I would be very transparent, very straightforward about what I believe should be done. And if anybody in the companies where I work would want to come to me with that type of feedback, I'd be delighted.
And if anybody has a word of advice, I think we're open to hear that. I think organizing, when you look at sales work, I think one of the predominant things is that you organize so that everybody can be accountable. So good leadership will also demarcating the kinds of jobs that people have so that they can be accountable. Another thing about the never give up. Yes, people give up. They just quit doing whatever they were doing and they go like, oh, I'll start another one and what have you. So how do you, and also the bad news travel fast. Is it enough to tell people that always tell me immediately when you have bad news? Is that enough? And how do you, there are quitters everywhere.
Quitting doing something that doesn't work is not quitting. If you kill a project and start a new one, if you kill a company and start a new one, it's not quitting. You still believe in achieving something big and important. So you just need to think about the definition of quitting. And yes, there are people who quit too early and who don't persevere, who don't believe. That's partially the fault of the leadership, because they didn't give that faith to people. Especially people who don't have the experience, they haven't gone through enough failures to believe that you can always survive and you can always get up again. So that's partially the fault of the leadership, but also partially something that people need to develop in themselves so that they can persevere, they can go through hard times. Should we ask the audience, because your questions are too hard.
You can just say it out loud, we'll repeat the question here, that's fine.
Well, enforcing accountability is of course very difficult. You can talk about it. You can reward people who do it. But you can't force anybody to feel anything. You can't force anybody to feel accountable. But you can, I believe that when you define the kind of a culture you want to have, you live by that yourself, and you talk about it often enough, it will shape people. It will help you recruit people. You can think about, okay, this is the kind of a culture I want to have. What could I ask new recruits for me to be better able to understand whether they fit that culture or not? And over time you get better at that. So you recruit people who fit in the culture rather than you change people who don't fit in the culture, trying to force them to fit in. How do you give negative feedback? I think with a lot of respect, a genuine desire to be of help. The person you give negative feedback needs to really believe that you are trying to help them. If they believe that you are just trying to be nasty to them, they will not be responsive. But if they believe that you absolutely have their best in mind, even if you are firing them, they still believe that you believe that this is best for them as well. They may disagree, but they still believe that you really feel that way. And it will make taking negative feedback so much easier. Somebody else? That change is the next brand. Wow. I mean, change is ever present in everything we do. Whether it can be the next brand, perhaps at least it needs to be part of many brands. The kind of a brand that I would associate with would definitely have a change component in it. And if I think about Nokia was founded 150 years ago this year. It started as a paper mill based on this revolutionary idea that you don't need to make paper out of lump. You can actually make it out of wood. And so Fredrik Idestam, who founded the company, had a vision which was based on new technology. But then the company started doing marine cables, wake up, marine cables, rubber boots, tissue paper, TVs, PCs, mobile networks, handsets. And a number of times the company has been at the brink of a destruction, but it has always recovered. So how do you motivate a small team to overachieve? that's a tough question. I think the key ingredient is that I work harder than any of them. And they see me doing that. So I'm not asking them to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. And when my own company was young, for example, we had vacuum cleaning roles in a rotating basis. And I took one more road than anybody else. I used the vacuum cleaner a little bit more often than others until we were able to hire a cleaning lady. And I hated it. And you try to show a good example. I think that goes a long way. Most of the best people that I have worked with, I have never had to sort of separately motivate. There are definitely a lot of people that you need to really sit down with and think about how do I help you to work better, more productively, in a more positive mindset. But most of the best people that I have worked with don't need that and never have. But I think if I would have set a different example, they would have not felt comfortable. Because, if there's one bad apple in a basket, it will spread. And if the leader is the bad apple, asking everybody to do much more than he's willing to do himself, then it just doesn't work. My leadership philosophy when I was young actually came from sort of the books that were written over the past 300 years for teenagers, sort of boys' adventure books. I read every single book that was in the Helsinki Central Library aimed at this audience, including the ones that had been taken out of circulation because they were in such a bad shape. The library archive ladies that work in the basement and never see a customer, they all knew me by name because I sort of asked them to bring up the books that they had there and I read them all. So I had this vision of the kind of a gentleman from the 1800s who joins a naval vessel when he was young, 8 years old, and then goes through all sorts of adventures, and there are bad leaders and good leaders, and the right always wins. And the gentleman opens the door for the lady, and these old ideals. And I believed in those. And that shaped the profile that I aspired to be when I was young. Now I have the same ideals, but in a different format.
Okay, one more question and then moving on.
We've seen a flow of new product development lately. Is this a result of some kind of reinforcement of the culture or what?
Yeah, we sort of feel that we are going back to the earlier days when we were able to churn out much more products than we were able to do between 2008 and 2012. And what happened in F-Secure during those 4 years was that we somehow got mired into these huge R&D projects that were basically sort of platform projects that just took forever and cost 5 times more than we expected and took 3 times more time than we expected and just ate all resources. This vicious circle where you start to be late and stupidly in software projects you add more people, which means that you will definitely be even more late. And quality gets bad and just becomes a vicious circle. So that's what happened, and for a time we really did not launch many new products. And then we sort of just slapped each other or ourselves on both cheeks and said that, hey, we need to shape up, we need to change this. Let's just start from the beginning. That's learning from a mistake as well. So would it be okay if I talk a little bit about a practical, challenging leadership situation? And then we can have another discussion. So I had the privilege of overseeing one of the transformations of Nokia's history over the past couple of years. And as sometimes before, the company was heading towards the brink of an abyss once again. When I started as chairman in mid-2012, the company had a really difficult spring. Over those 2 quarters, the operating loss of the company was over 2 billion. In the second quarter alone, our core business lost more than a quarter of its revenues compared to the previous year. The cash outflow was very significant. The press was speculating when the company would go bankrupt, not if, but when. And of course they were completely wrong about that, but that speculation was quite widespread. The employees were reading those stories. A very negative situation. And we were also thinking about launching the biggest layoffs in the company's history. Balance sheet was getting weaker and weaker. And strategically, the handset market was becoming less and less attractive. So all possibilities were up in the air, including the worst ones that you can think of. Our investors felt that the Nokia stock, or let's say the long-only investors, felt that the Nokia stock was non-investable. When we went to talk to some of the funds that are long-only, they told us that we actually don't want to see you. We don't own your share, and we will not own it because we are not following it. And the reason why we are not following it is because it's non-investable. So quite a challenging time. What did I do when I became the chairman? I started changing the way the board worked. That's my closest team. Trying to renew the culture in the board, and then extending that to the management team, and then onwards from there. And I think especially afterwards that the most important way to think about that is through the lens of trust. And if you are a good leader, you generate trust around you in multiple ways. In the board, the first board meeting we had after I became chairman, I introduced a set of golden rules for the board, which we then discussed, made a couple modifications, and then approved. 5 rules. And those rules allowed me a platform from which to talk to individual board members after a especially emotional meeting, because we were thinking about really sort of bad outcomes, and they misbehaved, or they behaved in a way that, or some of them, that was not sort of taking the discussion in the right direction. And I was able to talk to them about that, because we had these golden rules. We had together agreed how we want to behave, what kind of a board culture we want to have. It's really hard to talk to people that are not employed by you and who are typically CEOs, very, very experienced people, often with big egos, like all of leaders typically have. Especially if you are 10 years or 20 years younger than they are, and then you go to tell them that now you did something bad. If you don't have something to lean on. And the golden rules provided that. I deliberately increased the working hours, because the more you work together with your team, the tighter you become. So I just decided that we'll add as many hours to our meetings as is possible. So we start earlier, we finish later, lunches are shorter, they're always working lunches, less governance topics, more strategy. So we probably more than doubled the amount of time we spent on strategy. Also changed people on the board. Over the last 2 years, actually the whole board has been changed. I'm the only person left from the old board. So recruiting new people. During the first year, we spent 30% more time in the board work. During the second year, we had over 60 meetings in the board. And that's a huge number. Our attendance rate was very close to 100%. And we didn't vote a single time. All decisions were unanimous. We just did so much thinking, so much analysis, that in the end, even the most difficult decisions became very easy once you have done the work. And there was so much trust between the people that everybody could easily speak their mind. The management team needed to think about the board differently. This new board respected a management team member who comes up and says that I don't really know what to do. I see these two alternatives. I'm not sure which one is better. Let me tell you what the pros and cons are from my point of view. Maybe you can come up with a third alternative, which is better than either one of these. Or you can help me understand which one of these is better for the company. Rather than what often happens in boards, i.e. a management team member stands up, gives a presentation, there's only one way forward, and he or she tries to sell that as hard as she can. And the board is completely useless. We're not being asked to do anything, we're not being asked to assist, we're not given a full sort of pros and cons. There's only one way forward and we should just rubber stamp that. It's dismotivating for the board. And it might well not be the best way forward for the company. I started interviewing all the direct reports of the CEO. That's a bit of a no-no in a company. The CEOs are always quite hesitant about this when I tell them that that's one of my practices. But it allows me to get to know the second level people very well. I do one-on-one interviews once every 6 months. And I probe them quite a lot about 5 things. What is the culture in the company from their point of view? How is the CEO leading the cultural change? How does the management team work? How are the agendas built? How is the CEO resolving conflicts in the management team? All sorts of practical things. How does the CEO lead the team? Then the individual. What's the relationship between the individual and the CEO? How does the CEO help, support, develop that individual? Then that individual's point of view towards the board. How could the board do better? How could the board support that person better? Has the person ever felt that he was unfairly treated by the board? And then finally, the individual. What are your aspirations? Would you, for example, want to become the CEO of this company someday? That's one of the board's most significant duties, to pick the CEO. So it's definitely important to know which ones of the management team members actually have that aspiration. And a good CEO supports and deliberately develops people underneath him to replace himself someday in the future. And what I do after that round of interviews, I go to the CEO, we sit down, and I tell him everything that I have learned, adding my own analysis on top, but in an anonymous fashion. The CEO will not know who said what, but otherwise complete transparency. And my only motivation is to help the CEO to be as successful as possible. Often the CEO is the last person to hear about certain things. And with this process, he will hear about certain things much sooner. Some CEOs that I have done this with have started doing it with their own direct reports, sort of taking it one level down. It has worked very, very well. And again, this is something that I don't know of any other chairman that does this. But it's such a sensible thing. But there are these formal barriers. This has never been done before. It's not customary. It will degrade my authority if you start doing it. And that's bullshit. If the CEO feels that, hey, this actually works, I'm supported by my chairman, And he actually knows what my challenges are. I don't have to hide them anymore. I can be openly who I am. That's such a liberating feeling. Instead of having this gnawing feeling in your stomach that I have this weakness and he doesn't know about it. How do I hide it? With full transparency, life is so much easier. The board and the management team are, in my opinion, one team with two groups and two different roles. But we really need to feel deep down that we are one team. We have a joint mission. And that makes that cooperation much more rewarding. I also feel that we need to laugh more. A board meeting where we don't laugh is a really, really bad board meeting. I mean, laugh out loud, not just smile. Especially if you are at the brink of destruction, you really need to find things to laugh at. Because suddenly the gorge in front of you doesn't seem as daunting. And you actually have faith that if these other guys can laugh under these circumstances, maybe there's still hope. So very, very simple things. Sometimes leadership can be not that complicated. And you also need to try to build the trust towards the employees. And that's, of course, the most difficult thing to do because you can't meet all of them. And you need to do decisions that they don't like. And you can't explain those decisions one-on-one. So in Nokia's case, taking the networks business and the mother Nokia, the company has had to lay off roughly 70,000 people over the last few years. That's a huge number. It's just immense. We tried to do it in a way that it would be as painless as possible and thinking about the long-term well-being of those people primarily. We created a program called Bridge. Some of you may have heard about that. It had 3 goals: to help the people, number 1, to help the society, the village, the town, the city, and to help Nokia. That was the 3rd one. And we deliberately said that this is the priority order. 60% of the people that went through Bridge knew what they would do next during their final day in Nokia. They either had a new job, either in Nokia or in another company. They had a place at a university or at a school. They would start learning more. They would become entrepreneurs. Nokia gave them 20,000 euros as a starting money, maybe some patents or other assets, maybe some software code. Over 1,000 new companies were formed through Bridge. And interestingly, about 18 months after, 95% of those companies were still in existence. Because I was afraid that, okay, we'll give them some money and they will start a new company, but it will be short-lived. But an amazingly high number of those companies still existed a year or a year and a half later. And then, interestingly, we had a third party ask the people who had been laid off, again about 18 months later, how did they think about that process afterwards? And 85% of them said that they are satisfied or very satisfied with the process. And I think that's a hugely important result. It meant a number of critical things. First of all, it meant that the people who stayed in the company could trust that if the worst happens, I will be treated well as well. So I can work with motivation because I don't need to be as much afraid for my own job as I might be under other circumstances if Nokia would treat the departing people badly. It also gives the management time to focus on the transformation of the business, not dealing with industrial action by the employees, or not dealing as much with dissatisfied, disappointed employees. So multiple benefits if you can treat under those dark circumstances people that are being laid off well. You should really think about that. How can you do it as well as possible? The way we ended up solving Nokia's challenges was basically changing all the atoms in the company. That's exaggerating a little bit, but not much. We changed the whole board. I'm the only old board member left. Changed the whole management team except for one person. Everybody else is new. We sold the old core business to Microsoft. We acquired a new core business. The half of NSN that we didn't already own, we acquired from Siemens. We created a new vision, a new strategy, a new structure. We created a new balance sheet structure, and we hired a completely new leadership team and CEO. As a result of this complete transformation, the company's business value grew by 14 times in about 2 years. And a 14-time EV multiple in a couple of years is really not common in larger companies. And Nokia became again the most valuable company in Finland, one of the biggest software companies in the world. We have over 60,000 employees. 90% of our R&D is software work. It's not hardware, it's software. We are easily one of the largest European technology companies. And almost by any metric, we are more productive and more competitive than our closest competitors. We have 3 businesses. At the end of last year, all 3 were growing, close to 10% over the previous year. All were profitable, and all were more profitable than the closest comparison points in other companies. So truly a magnificent transformation which required very hard decisions and a lot of luck. I'll give you one example of luck, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how do you create your own luck. So during the summer of 2013, we were in the midst of this process dealing with Microsoft about the handset division. I was talking to Steve Ballmer at least once every week, and we were meeting every other week, negotiating how do we create this deal. And there were many hiccups. One was that I actually shook hands with Steve Ballmer on a deal. Everything was done. And then his board turned the deal down. And that's not done. When the CEO shakes hands on a deal, it should be a done deal. But his board turned it down. And that was a huge surprise, not just to me, but even more to him. But we recovered from that catastrophe because we had so much trust between the teams that were negotiating this. And we restarted from with a different perimeter, i.e. a different asset collection. And then in June of that year, June and July, we were also talking to Siemens about acquiring this half of NSN. But we couldn't really afford it because we had a negative cash flow for a long time. The future was uncertain. We had some debts expiring the next spring over about a couple billion worth. balance sheet was getting weaker. We didn't have any access to the financial markets because we had this insider project with Microsoft. So really difficult to acquire the networking business. So we came up with the idea that I'd call Ballmer, and I actually called him one Sunday night, and I told him that, you know that we have this meeting agreed in New York or somewhere next Sunday or next weekend. We'll definitely want to come, but we can only come if you agree to 5 preconditions that I have for you. And I'll explain to you exactly why we really need those. This is not gaming or this. I'm not playing anything, but we really need these 5 things. And I explained to him what they are, and one of them was that they need to finance us with 1.5 billion, regardless of whether we do a deal with them or not. So they needed to commit to 1.5 billion in financing to Nokia for us to come to the next meeting. And eventually they agreed, so they ended up funding the acquisition of 50% of NSN. And neither party really knew about each other. It was especially important that Siemens doesn't find out that we are talking to Microsoft, because if they had known that we will get a lot of cash, the price would have been different. With these 2 transactions that we then managed to complete at the absolutely optimal time for both, just a couple months later would have meant a really huge amount of money. We created the platform for the 14-fold increase in the value of the business. That was really financial engineering at its best, but it also created the basis for new Nokia, so that the Nokia story continues. And that 2-year period, at the end of which I was both CEO and chairman and worked on the vision, strategy, structure, leadership team, CEO selection, and capital structure. That was the real mission that I had for those 8 months. Of course, including that the Microsoft deal closes, so that it actually completes. That was essential. That was such a university of change management and transformation management that it's priceless. In hindsight, it was so much fun. At that time, it was sometimes extremely painful. But even through those weeks and months, I always believed that we just work very hard, we are relentless, we believe in the future, we laugh a lot, we keep each other motivated, we will somehow make this a success. We'll find a good way forward. And we did. So that's sort of a case story of some of the things I talked about earlier. And I'd be happy to take more questions if we still have a few minutes.
Sure. Questions?
Coming back to your previous speech, when you are like a small company, you have a lot of fire to put water on. What is the best way to free yourself and to, let's say, focus more on the future? Because I'm in that position that I'm almost getting a burnout.
Yeah. I had the same question. So as a CEO, how do you then deal with the fire so that you can stick to the horizon?
Somebody from inside the team and put then like more project manager so you can do the business development.
Gotcha, mate. Okay.
So how does the CEO have enough time to work on the long-term things when everything is burning around him? Now, there are many small things that you can do and you should do. I mean, stopping to prioritize. For example, Sunday evening before the week starts, you think about what do I really need to achieve during this week? How can I spare at least 1 3-hour time period that I completely clean off everything else, switch off my phone and think about the next year and the next 3 years, if you feel that is what you have been missing out on? How do I find the kind of colleagues that I can really delegate to? If you don't have those, then use that 3 hours thinking about how do you recruit new ones, if you really don't have them. Is it that your team is not motivated? Is that the reason why you can't, give more responsibility to them? Think about how can I motivate them? Get everybody together and really just talk about the problems that you have. What keeps you awake at night? And ask them for help. Ask them for ideas. I mean, I don't think there's any magical bullet that would solve these issues. And I don't even think that they are leadership issues. They are management issues. Managing your time, managing your calendar, managing your team, managing everybody's priorities. It's actually quite easy. But there's nothing you can do that would change it overnight. You just need to keep doing the right things for a time. It's like walking through this valley, and you know that the hill is up front, and you'll get up there, and the view will be beautiful. Keep on walking.
3 more questions, so Risto, you pick.
Thank you. I'm Vishal. I came all the way from Slovenia, and I have a question for you. Since you're a business angel, what kind of companies or what kind of teams would you like to cooperate with to help them?
I'll add to that so that it gets faster. So what kind of industries and technologies? So teams, industries, technologies. Any hints for people that you see now a good time to start and grow?
Well, I like to invest in teams where I see the kind of entrepreneurial qualities that I listed earlier combining into. And of course, the vision that they really burn to implement the vision that they have. And it doesn't need to be a strategy. If there's a great team and a direction, I believe that there's always a way. There's always a path that can be found. I have made the mistake of investing in ideas. I usually have failed. Investing in teams, I have almost never failed. I mean, I hated it when experienced VCs told me 20 years ago that, Risto, don't invest in ideas, invest in teams. And I was so in love with the ideas. I thought I can figure out the team around the idea, but it just doesn't work that way. Because the best people are so difficult to recruit because they all already have something to do that they really love. So you actually need to find the people. And I think through experience you learn to recognize those qualities in people. It's not something that you can make a checklist out of. You just need to talk with them and sense how they feel and how they think. And then what businesses should they be focused on? I mean, it can be anything. One of my favorite companies at the moment is a company called Enevo. Have any of you heard about the company? They work in waste management. It's almost like a Chicago mob business. And they have a very simple idea. They will put sensors on the lids of the waste containers that will connect to the cloud. And you can see from a cloud service what is the optimal way to drive around the town and empty the waste containers at the right time so that the consumers will be happy. Every time they want to put some trash away, there's always space in the waste container, but you don't drive somewhere to empty a canister that is only 10% full. And some of these waste management companies have achieved savings of 60-70% in their operating costs just by taking this system into use. It's such a simple idea on something very old-fashioned. I mean, we have been creating trash for forever and doing something to it. And it's revolutionizing the way waste is managed. And it's technologically difficult. It's not something that can be easily copied. And then there are some medical devices companies that I really like. I think anything that improves human life is really motivating. Games, actually I don't like game companies that much, but there are some really great teams that want to do games, and I love those teams. but I don't necessarily love the idea of spending money so that people can waste time playing games. Even if I understand that it's fun and people need to have fun, and I like playing games myself. But as an investment target, I don't really like games, but I like some of the teams. I don't know if that was helpful at all, but... Okay, go ahead.
You mentioned about the change of the work culture, how the ways of working was changed. Do you think that it reflected also how the Nokia was internally working, how the culture was cultivated inside Nokia in deeper levels? So was it affecting on that short schedule of time actually was you?
I think a leadership example always affects people who witness how the leadership works. Always. In good and bad. And you always need to keep that in your mind. Whatever you do, whatever you say, it always influences people. How much it can influence a company with over 60,000 people, or in the years past over 100,000 people, I mean, it's very slow going. And you don't change a company's culture just by setting a leadership example. You need to do much more. And no matter what you do, you may end up doing what Lei Jun did, i.e. starting a new company so that you can create the culture that you want. Because you need to do that by hiring the right people. And that's one reason why Nokia has, as difficult and painful as it is, had to lay off 70,000 people, so that it has been able to hire new people who are not necessarily better than the old ones, but they come in without the old baggage. They don't have a cultural imprint on their brains of how does this company work and how do people behave in this company. But they come in with an open mind. And then you can create a new culture.
All right, one last question.
They are a bit long, but I can read you a couple. So the first one is very simple, and I copied this from somebody else. It's assume the best of intentions in the actions of others. If you think about it, it's such a simple thing. Somebody comes to you, suggests something, behaves a bit weird, and you're like, is he criticizing what I have been doing? Because he's suggesting that I change the way I work or speak or present or run meetings or something. He's criticizing me. But then you stop. I need to assume the best of intentions from this guy. Actually, he's trying to help me. So my first response will be completely different if I assume that he has best intentions. Instead of being defensive, I'll actually be thankful. And this is so hard to live by, but it's such a good rule to have. And it continues that operate openly, honestly, and directly, and expect others to do the same. And directly means that you speak your mind, but you do it respectfully. And you also demand that others expect that you have the best of intentions. But you need to have the best of intentions, really. If you don't, it's all false. And maybe I'll mention another one here, which I believe very strongly, and this has been one of the guidelines for F-Secure from the beginning. We called it just Kaizen. You all know what Kaizen is. It's such an important core principle for the company from the very beginning. And the way we wrote it for the board is that we seek to constantly improve in everything we do, and all board members are expected to contribute to the improvement of our work, tools and processes, as well as the way we work as a team. So everybody is accountable for the way the team works, the tools, processes that we have, and we all should work to improve those. Very simple things, but it helps to agree on what is important. Thank you.